Welcome to the Holy Post. On today's show, responses to the mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde have continued, and there's renewed hope for policy changes. And a series of new articles from African American and global Christian leaders are causing us to rethink both America's gun policies and the American church's gun culture. Both Christian and Caitlin are overseas, so Phil and I are joined today by our friend Joe Saxton to discuss these articles and talk more about the church's response to the gun violence in our culture. Joe has years of experience as a church leader and is an author, speaker, and podcast host. We recommend checking out her show called Lead Stories, Tales of Leadership and Life. Then I'm joined by John Collins and Tim Mackie, the co-founders of the BibleProject, to talk about how their ministry has shifted from just teaching people what's in the Bible to actually teaching people how they should read the Bible. Their new app and podcast series is designed to help us see the Bible as way more than just a depository of quick answers to life's problems, but rather as deep spiritual literature. All of that, plus more people are having wedding ceremonies to marry themselves. Here is episode 513.
Hey there, everybody. This is Phil Vischer. Welcome back to the Holy Post podcast. I am here today. We got Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Glad you could come back again for another week. How many weeks have you missed in the last 10 years? I think I can think of maybe one or two where we recorded, but you weren't present.
Yeah, it hasn't been many. And the funny thing is, I think I travel more than you. But I seem to...
Oh, so you're looking for extra credit since you travel more and you've missed just a tiny bit more. Because I think I've missed maybe, I don't know, one. Well, you've done a couple for other podcasts that we use those episodes, but that doesn't count. That doesn't count. No. And we don't have Christian. We don't have Caitlin. They're both out of the country. We had Mike Erie last week. He was fun. But we wanted to take it up another notch, or maybe 3 notches from Mike Erie. And we brought in Joe Saxton. Joe Saxton, how the heck are you?
I'm doing all right, thank you. It's a joy to be with you.
Fantastic. You've been on the show at least 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, a couple of times. Yeah.
You're one of our faves. Joe Saxton is a podcast host, a leadership coach, and just informed us that she's a frequent Target shopper, lives in Minneapolis, the home of Target. So do you go to Target headquarters to get your special, deals and tell them how much you shop and ask for money?
You know what? I would love to do that, but I had a friend who worked at the headquarters and stuff, so she gave me a guided tour, and then I think they probably just decided I shouldn't be allowed to be there again because I was a little too fangirly about the shopping.
What is there to see at Target headquarters other than acres and acres of cubicles with people in them saying, "Oh, we're short of toilet paper"? In Arizona.
I'm not sure there's much. I mean, it was a while ago, and I just remember the wall art being particularly excellent and targetified. And
a lot of dogs. Sure.
Yeah, there were a lot of dogs. I know. It was cute. It was fun. It was kind of
it's like going to Chick-fil-A headquarters and there's cows everywhere and say, well, this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
They know their theme. They know how to put their theme up on the walls. That's fun.
They're committed. I liked it.
Going to Walmart headquarters and it's just cardboard containers filled with extra merchandise everywhere, and price tags.
And price tags.
And here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
With special guest host Joe Saxton.
Okay, I'm back. I've got a story, an interesting story, and I thought that, we want to have interesting stories for Joe. We don't want to throw her into the deep end of the pool. So I'm going to start with something a little bit lighter, and we'll see how she does. Then we'll pause and we'll do a survey and let the listeners say, all right, are we ready to throw her into the deep end of the pool? And then we'll toss. And then
this is not a live stream, Phil. We can't do that.
Surely we can. Julie, come up with a way to do that. Julie, have either of you, Skye Jitani or Joe Saxton, heard the term sologamy?
I know. I have sologamy?
Sologamy.
Yes. Sologamy.
It sounds like something forbidden.
Some things.
You know what polygamy is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it's related to that. Sologamy, and I'm assuming that's how you say it because it's sologamy, like polygamy.
Yeah.
S- Sologamy is a wedding ceremony where people marry themselves.
Themselves. It's got a
It
name?
is, yes, it has been a
Wait a minute.
growing
Why is there a ceremony?
It's
Sky.
I've heard of this. I have heard of this. This commitment people make to themselves.
Just let me get a little further into the story, Sky, before you start disputing all my sources. Sologamy is a wedding ceremony where people marry themselves. It has been a growing trend in the West over the past few years. This article came out of India because they believe it's a newspaper in India. They believe they found the first person who is performing a sologamy ceremony in India. It's a 24-year-old sociology student, says, many people tell me I'm a great catch, and I tell them I caught myself. By marrying herself, Miss Bindu said she would be dedicating her life to self-love. Self-marriage, this is a quote, is a commitment to being there for yourself, to choosing the livelihood and lifestyle that will help you grow and blossom into the most alive, beautiful, and deeply happy person you can be. Okay, don't comment yet. Hang on. I got a little bit more. Then you can jump in on this. The idea of marrying oneself first made news nearly 20 years ago when Carrie Bradshaw, a character on the popular American series Sex and the City, raised it as an issue. The show, though, was fiction. Since then, reports say there have been hundreds of such marriages, mostly by single women. Brides have walked down the aisle dressed in pristine wedding gowns, carrying a bouquet, sometimes with families and friends cheering them on. And in one highly unusual case, a 33-year-old Brazilian model divorced herself 3 months after her wedding.
Did she meet somebody?
I don't know.
What happened?
If you meet someone, are you can you have adultery with someone because
Can you cheat on yourself with yourself?
Yes,
Is what you're
yes.
saying.
You
And
are
so
your
you know it's
spouse.
happening.
Yes. So
Maybe if you have multiple personality disorder.
so let's start with Joe. Joe, how do you feel about this trend of self-marriage?
Okay, you're gonna think me weird, but at the thing is, when I
Yeah.
hear the description of it and why, I don't hate it, but I think it's weird. I feel like you could. Part of me is like, okay, well, have a party with friends.
Yeah.
And buy yourself a nice outfit, and I don't know, go have a spa day. I feel like the ceremony pushed it over the edge for me. I loved all the self-love. I loved all of the kind of, I want to bring out the best in myself. All of these
Yeah.
things sound wonderful.
Yeah.
And then it got weird, Phil. It got weird.
When
And then it got,
when you walk down the aisle by yourself?
no need for the aisle. No
Yeah.
need.
Is
I
there an
think
officiant? Is there an officiant? Is there a certificate of marriage?
maybe you make vows to yourself. Maybe you make
Yeah.
commitments to your own well-being. I feel you can do that
Isn't that just positive self-talk? Isn't that what we do when we, put on headphones and hear, you are brave and attractive. I am brave and attractive. Thank you. Okay, Skye. Have you performed any sologamies?
No. No. I have not. Okay, here's my thing though. I don't does our culture really need a ceremony in order to reinforce the importance of focusing on yourself?
Yes. Oh,
somebody's going to make money out of it, so probably.
Probably, yeah. That's the reason they do it. It seems like really over the top and unnecessary. Something that the culture already reinforces nonstop, 24/7, to be self-centered and self-indulgent and put your own dreams and desires ahead of everyone else's. That's the overwhelming message of our culture. So then to create a special ceremony in which we heighten that even more seems like overkill, doesn't it?
Well, it suggests the rest isn't working.
Oh, is it a critique? Is it a cultural critique of our current institution of marriage?
And maybe the sense of people spend tens of thousands on a day. One day. I can't get my head around that. Spend all this day to celebrate a relationship. And
Yeah.
maybe these others don't feel as celebrated. And so, and maybe in the same way there's a registry and all of these things and all these congratulations for the wedding day, maybe someone wants that level of celebration for them, that public honoring of them.
Celebrate me.
But
Celebrate me.
Can't you just do that for a birthday?
I'm down with the party. I think you should have a party. I think you should have a big, expensive, wear an amazing outfit type party. I think that would have done it. In
Okay.
fact, I'm sure I've had parties after
if
breakup with that in mind.
Joe Saxton, if
Yeah.
you were to marry yourself, would your registry be at Target?
You know what? Actually, Phil, for such a special occasion, I would go to Tiffany's. Like, you got one and done. I mean, I don't know what it was like when you guys did your registries, marriages, all that kind of stuff. But I was like, this is an opportunity, friends, to buy the things that you're not going to buy for yourself. I'm going to Target 3 times a day anyway. So no, I'm leveling up for that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because when else would you buy for yourself one of those holders of cashew? No, not what are kind of the nuts that you have to shell?
Pistachios.
Yes, pistachios that has the extra bowl around it for the shells. You know, the thing that only exists for when you put out pistachios. When would you ever buy that for yourself? That's why we get married.
There we go.
That's why God started marriage.
Okay, I have a question, a legitimate question.
Yes, Skye.
Obviously, throughout all of history and in every society and in every culture, there have been single adults.
Yes.
And in every culture...
But were they really committed? Were they really committed?
Well, no, but that's my point. In every society and every culture, there has been some way of dignifying that vocation. Right?
Yes.
We obviously dignify people who get married or have children, but there's also been ways of dignifying people who are unmarried in different ways.
Yes.
And I wonder is this just a result of the fact that American culture doesn't have a significant way of dignifying people who aren't married? Or the other way of putting the question is, rather than having a ceremony in which a single person makes a vow to themselves and asks everybody to spend money to come and celebrate that for them, it hasn't traditionally been that when a single person makes a commitment to something, someone, so even in like a convent, like a monk or a nun or whatever makes a vow, a covenant, a commitment to God, like that gets celebrated and honored in some way. But the idea of only celebrating your commitment to yourself, that seems kind of weird, doesn't it?
I mean, I feel it does speak to a loss of ritual. I think it does speak to a loss of benchmarks and kind of milestones in a person's life. It's like once you've done the graduation thing, what else is there? We celebrate marriage, we celebrate christenings and funeral, whatever. What I'm most intrigued by was the bit, Phil, where you said, you know, it was largely women. I want to know what happened before that. I want to know what happened before that made you say, I know, I'm going to celebrate me. That's what I want to know. I'm curious.
Yeah, but not just celebrate me, marry myself.
That's a whole nother level when you put that word in there, isn't it?
It's true. That's the whole covenant thing happening.
And what does the proposal look like? Are you on one knee or are you on one knee?
Well, that's the thing is you can be on one knee and half of you is still on foot, right? So it all works.
It's not really
very complicated.
It is
okay. Let us know what you think. Is sologamy? It sounds like a really nice processed ham that you can put on.
They need a better word. They need a better word.
It's not going to take off. It sounds like a sausage. I'm sorry.
It needs rebranding.
And if Subway comes out with their new Sologamy sandwich, I'm not going to trust it. I don't care what they say it is. I don't think they're telling the truth. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now we got to turn a corner. Fun time gone, happy feeling gone. For the last 2 weeks, we've talked about gun violence, gun rights, gun control. We've had interactions on Twitter. We've had interactions on the Holy Post site. Lots of interactions. I thought that we were probably done, that we had talked enough. But over the last couple of days, some of our friends of the show, have written some really interesting pieces to continue the conversation. And so I wanted to cover some of those because I thought some people that we know and trust were making some really valuable contributions. First, though, I made a comment on the Holy Post website last week, I think, that there was something we were missing in the conversation because I've heard so many Christians say, yes, but I need to defend my family. You know, I need to have the right to defend my family. And we talked about the right to self-defense and if it's biblically rooted last week. But I I made a comment on the website last week that I think what we're forgetting, even in that argument, is that if you have a gun in your house and that gun is fired in your house, it is many times more likely that the person shot with your gun will be a member of your family rather than someone trying to hurt your family. So,
Yeah,
in
but did
other
they have
words,
it coming is the question.
ha ha ha. In other words, a gun. Joe, tell him how inappropriate that was. Joe.
Skye, that was inappropriate. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
But
See, with
why?
her accent, that just sounds much more authoritative
It
than me
does.
saying it. It's like, you got served. Rather than someone trying to hurt a member of your family. In other words, a gun in your house for the purpose of keeping your loved ones safe is much more likely to actually put them in danger. And I said that knowing at the time, I believe I've read this. I don't have the data to back this up. And one of our listeners, I love you guys, reached out and said, Phil, here's the data you need. And so I wanted to talk about that because it's really interesting. And this listener linked me to a study on this very subject. It was a study to determine the relative frequency with which guns in the home are used to injure or kill in self-defense compared with the number of times these weapons are involved in unintentional injuries, suicide attempts, or criminal assaults.
So like domestic violence.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a gun in your house, how likely is it to be used for the thing you want to use it for, protecting your children or your spouse, versus how likely is it to be used for things you really do not want it to be used for? And this study reviewed police, medical examiners, emergency medical services, emergency departments, hospital records of all fatal and non-fatal shootings in 3 U.S. cities: Memphis, Tennessee, Seattle, Washington, and Galveston, Texas, over a 12-month period in Memphis and over an 18-month period in Seattle and Galveston. And during that study, there were 626 shootings that occurred in or around a residence. And so they went through all the numbers on all those shootings. There were 54 unintentional shootings, 118 attempted or completed suicides, 438 assaults or homicides. There were 13 shootings out of the 626 that were legally justifiable or an act of self-defense, which included
Wow.
3 that were by law enforcement officers acting in the line of duty. So what they drew out of this is, and I kind of summarized it this way: if you have a gun in your home and that gun is used in or around your home, it is 4 times more likely that it is used in an accidental shooting than that it is used to defend your family. It is 7 times more likely that it is used in a criminal assault or a murder than that it is used to defend your family. And it is 11 times more likely that it is used in a suicide attempt than that it is used to defend your family. So there's actually hard data that says you're putting your family at risk. Now, this isn't an argument against, we hunt in our family. This is an argument against people, who know how to store firearms and
Yeah.
keep them for very specific reasons. It's an argument against the argument that I have to have a gun or my family isn't safe. And the hard data says the opposite is true.
And it's not even close.
And it's not even close.
It's
It's
staggering.
not even close. So I thought I was speaking correctly. And so I appreciate the audience for saying, yes, you were speaking correctly. We'll link to that study in the show notes if you want to take a look at it.
But
there was
Phil,
yes,
to play
Skye.
devil's advocate a little bit here,
Don't do that, Skye.
don't you think the psychological feeling that my family is safer is just a little bit more important than my family actually being safer?
There is the psychology of it. Yeah, Joe, do you need to, set them right again?
Well,
Joe?
I don't know how to help you, Phil, here on this one, but I guess people must feel that.
Yeah, there's obviously that psychology. Just like we feel safer in really big cars than in smaller cars, even if there's so many airbags in the small cars that in crash tests, they're actually as safe. So there are these psychological. To put it another way, you could look at, a gun in the home for self-defense is a placebo.
Right.
It makes you feel a certain way, but it's a poisoned placebo. It
Yeah.
actually makes you less safe while it makes you feel safe.
So, in other words, taking this placebo is likely going to make you feel better, but it's actually 10 times more likely to harm you than to actually cure the thing you're hoping it will cure.
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
pretty risky placebo, if you ask me.
It's a pretty
Staggeringly risky placebo.
pointless placebo. Okay.
Not even a placebo.
Yeah, it's a gun.
Yeah.
It's
Turns
um,
out.
another thing that we've brought up recently, and Skye tried to kind of have this debate with David French, was what if we treated guns more like we treat cars? Yeah, because the news story came out that guns are now the number one killer of fill in the blank.
Children and teens.
Children and teenagers up to age 19. There was a big story in Vox recently that looked at CDC research on death rates for Americans 24 and younger. So not children and teens, but what they refer to as young people. And for young people, 24 and younger, cars have always been the number one cause of death. Guns passed cars as the cause of death sometime in the late 2000, about 2017, 2018. And guns have been the leading cause of death for young people aged 24 and under ever since then. Now, what is missing from that, and this is the topic of the article, which is very interesting, is that the death rate for young people from car accidents has dropped in half over just the last 20 years. So since 2000, the deaths per 100,000 people ages 1 through 24 has dropped roughly in half. And that wasn't because we're all better drivers now. It's because we decided that we would proactively reduce traffic deaths.
Yeah.
Joe?
We took better measures.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we did. So what did we do? You want to know what we did? Here's what we did. I'll tell you what we did. It started in the 1960s. If anyone's old enough to remember Ralph Nader, he wrote a book in 1965 called Unsafe at Any Speed, which was about the car industry and how dangerous many of the cars being manufactured were. This catalyzed an auto safety movement that culminated in the creation of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which set up the infrastructure for automobile safety. From the 1970s onward, this group would maintain a database on motor vehicle-related deaths, make research investments, and provide safety certifications for cars on the market, incentivizing auto companies to adopt safety procedures. If cars went one way with safety, and this is what we did, it was extraordinarily proactive. They even made it that states would get more funding for highways if they adopted speed limits and other safety measures for safe driving. So cars went one way with safety and guns went the other way. Guns are actually, I didn't know this, one of the only consumer goods in America whose safety is not regulated by any government agency.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Toys are regulated. Toys, the manufacture of toys, there's a whole department of the government to regulate the manufacture of toys so we know that they're safe. So toy guns are more regulated than actual guns in their safety and manufacture. To top it all off, federal research about guns, gun violence, and gun safety was frozen for over 20 years due to an NRA-backed measure known as the Dickey Amendment. We made it illegal. We made it against the law for the federal government to study gun violence because we didn't want to know what they would find out.
I would amend that. I don't think it's because they didn't want to know what they would find out. Is when they found out what gun violence really looked like in America, there would be an outrage and a call for action. That's the problem. And now the only time we get this outrage and there's a massive call for action is when there's a terrible mass shooting like Sandy Hook or Uvalde or one of these other just horrific moments. But if we just saw the data and saw how many people were regularly dying because of gun violence, they would have moved the needle on this a long time ago. So you just keep people in the dark, keep them ignorant, make sure the government can't measure it, you can't study it, you can't report on it, you can't view it as a public health issue. Imagine if there was never a study on how many people died in car accidents or what measures would have prevented those car accidents. Think about
Right.
how many more hundreds of thousands of Americans would be dead because we'd never improved car safety.
Right. We regulate how much impact a bumper needs to be able to absorb
Yeah.
without damage before you can sell a car in the United States. Joe,
And auto manufacturers were held
Skye.
liable for faulty safety of their products, which you
Mhm.
can't do with gun manufacturers.
Right. There is no group in the government that can force a recall of defective guns. If they discover there's a manufacturing error and the guns are blowing up in people's faces, no one can force a recall because we've set guns on a pedestal like the baby Jesus and said, this cannot be touched. This is holy. So when we say we might have an idolatrous relationship with guns in parts of America, this is what we're talking about. Joe, where did you grow up?
I grew up in England. Born in London, born and raised. And
London, born and raised. Is that why you talk so fun?
It is.
Oh,
Where I come from, we all sound like this, but here,
that's
well,
amazing. That's just amazing. So when did you move to the US?
Nearly 20 years ago, 2004, roundabout.
When did you first notice we have a different view of firearms than you did growing up?
When I was probably at church and people were talking about their guns.
Okay.
Would probably be, and maybe seeing a few. I think the casual nature of it, probably, and I can't. Probably I cannot remember which. I mean, this is horrible to even put it this way. I can't remember which mass shooting it was because there have been that many over the years. And see, I think the nonchalance, the kind of, oh well, and the nonchalance on all quarters in terms of the kind of, there's nothing we can do about this. The kind of feigned helplessness, I think, hit me really hard for a country which is so proactive about many, many things, and has culturally has pioneered the way in all kinds of progress and technology. And I'm like, so how? I didn't get it. I still don't get it.
That's because in England you didn't grow up with guns and you lived under the oppression of Queen Elizabeth.
Well, and also, that may have been one single part because obviously
we don't have a monarch, but we have 400 million guns, and darn it, that's why we don't have a monarch.
Yeah, and for all the damage that she has done as a wonderful tourist attraction, I know it's devastating. And I tell you the other thing that marked my particular childhood, my young adult years, there was Dunblane. Dunblane was a mass shooting in Scotland. It's a place in Scotland. Devastating. I was in my 20s, and it was horrendous. But it marked people's psyche, in terms of this can't happen. This can't happen. And it can't happen again. And things were changed. Do you know what I mean? Laws were changed, and because it wasn't a partisan issue.
Right.
It wasn't.
Am I correct that there's not been a mass shooting in England since then? Yeah.
Obviously, we know there are significant problems, all these kinds of things. But every time this happens, my WhatsApp and my phone goes nuts, and my friends are like, explain this to me. I don't get it. Why is this still happening? Again, and those are the ones that reach their news cycle, because not all of them do.
Okay. So if people aren't watching this and they only hear your voice, they might not know that are you of Nigerian origin?
Yep.
Yeah. So, people who just see you here say, oh, she's African American. No, she's not African American. She's, what do they call it in Britain? What are
I'm
British?
Nigerian.
You're called Nigerian.
Yeah, Nigerian.
That's so innovative. She's Nigerian. So you come to America and you move to Minneapolis, which has quite a recent history of, protest about treatment of African Americans by police. in some of these, shootings of unarmed
Yeah.
men. So how do you feel like you have any sort of a unique perspective, both from your African heritage and your non-US heritage, in kind of looking at the situation we're in and saying something that we find brilliant and provocative?
I mean, I don't know that it's unique. I think it's I don't know whether it's unique, but I think it is staggering. I'm I don't know that it's unique, but there are many, many, many countries where there are issues of mental health. There are many, many, many countries and people of many countries playing video games. There are many, many, many countries of all the reasons that are given as to why we need to. There are many, many
But
countries where you
but
can't pray in schools.
oh,
Many.
okay, you got me. But are there any other countries that have turned away from God the way we have?
Plenty. And I think the secret is in the way we have. That is a whole other thing and entirely. But
Eh,
but I think I would encourage people to ask people of other countries what they do,
right.
because it blows the mind, Phil. I can't even. It blows the mind, and add the faith perspective to it, and then complete mind meltdown.
Yeah. Well, that's what
When,
our friend
when
that's
faith
what our
produces,
friend Matthew Sorens thought. He's been on the show multiple times. He worked for World Vision, World
World
Relief,
relief.
World Relief,
Wo-
and he's
World
not
relief.
there now. He's doing something else now. Is he?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Matt Sorens wrote a piece for Christianity Today,
yeah,
talking about his experience with Christians around the world who ask him questions about guns in America, and particularly the Christian fondness of guns in
yeah,
America. And the subtitle of the article is just Christians leading communities plagued by cartels and gangs are baffled that American Christians would still champion the right to own firearms. He talks about interviewing different Christians, like in Central America, where there is high gun violence. He says the tragic commonness of gun violence in the United States is stunning to many people beyond the United States, including many fellow Christians. Then he
yeah,
talks about a Honduran pastor named Luis Luna, who says the love of guns in America will always be beyond my understanding. He says Honduras and other Central American countries also have serious problems with gun violence fueled by drug cartels and criminal gangs. So the fact that the U.S. also has gun violence is not necessarily surprising. What's bewildering to Pastor Luna is the idea that Christians would champion gun ownership. He
yeah,
reflected on his astonishment at witnessing an American missionary insisting to a local congregation in a violence-marred community that they had a responsibility to arm themselves. And he said the congregation cried out, "My God, no!" using the Lord's name not in vain, but in intercession. Another Nicaraguan Christian says, "We associate firearms with killing, and it's
yeah,
very difficult to conceive of how a Christian could be ready to kill someone."
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Every word, every word, every word. I don't know how are we doing this? And I I'm staggered. I'm staggered by the whether it's the oh well. I think someone said to me, "Well, this will just keep going until Jesus comes again." Like I remember, posting, when's it going to stop? I think that was all I had that day on the socials. When's it
Mhm,
going to stop? When will
mhm.
this end? And someone said, until the Lord comes again. I'm like, okay, theologically, I get it, but what are we? Why don't we just all gather together and sing "Que Sera, Sera"? I mean, what is this? That
Mhm,
why are we
mhm.
okay with that? And why are we defending that? How are we defending? How I don't get it. And have we not thought? I guess my invitation to you guys would be, and my invitation would be, when we think of the council of the global church, is there anything they would have to say to us to consider, to
Yeah.
weigh, to just even weigh and reflect upon?
But Joe, I agree with you, obviously, but you could make that same statement regarding so many different issues in the American church,
Yeah,
especially the white evangelical church. There is a general global ignorance
yeah,
about what does both historic and global Christianity have to say about fill in the blank. And so when you exist in that very myopic
yes,
vision of Christianity, and it's shaped largely by politics, and it's shaped by American constitutionalism and a sense of rights, and on numerous fronts, a profound sense of fear and embattlement.
yeah, Yeah.
all of that, then it begins to make sense why there is such a veneration of firearms
Mhm.
as a sign of freedom and independence and safety and all the things that when you go to another part of the world, the same weapon represents precisely the opposite.
Yeah, and I'd understand it. Because I've had to learn, I've had to learn and listen and pay attention, and that would all make sense if the data that Phil shared earlier wasn't that way.
Well, it's another reason why they don't want us knowing the data, why the Dickey Amendment was so important. Just keep people ignorant so we can keep selling tons of weapons. And there's a reason why gun sales spike every time there's a mass shooting. Because
Oh,
people are worried the government's going to put new regulations in place. And in a weird, twisted sort of way, the increase in violence, the increase in mass shootings is the greatest marketing tool that the gun industry has.
Oh gosh.
Which is
Oh,
exactly why Wayne LaPierre, after the Sandy Hook shooting, said the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And
hey,
from
good guys, come by
and,
guns.
and certain politicians, whenever they get cornered on these questions of violence and gun deaths, always, 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 their solution is more guns.
yeah.
And
Okay,
it's a sick kind of death spiral we're in. And there are few who have the courage to stand up, especially on the right, and say, this has gone too far.
I got to go to the next story because our friend Esau McCauley wrote something. He's been writing monthly pieces for the New York Times. He got this piece in the New York Times. This is really something. He says the headline is "What Supporters of Gun Rights Mean When They Talk About Evil," and he talks about just that. The head of the National Rifle Association 3 days after that recent school shooting. The problem, he maintained, was not guns but the heart. He said, if we as a nation were capable of legislating evil out of the hearts and minds of criminals who commit these heinous acts, we would have done so a long time ago. Esau says the language of evil and hearts often rises to the fore in the context of mass shootings. It seems that Christian politicians who favor fewer restrictions on guns highlight this idea because it limits the responsibility for evil to the individual. We cannot eliminate evil hearts, so we cannot stop mass shootings. It does not matter that America far outpaces other nations in mass shootings. We must have an unexplainable abundance of evil hearts here. The problem with such thinking is that isn't that it's completely false, but that it is dangerously inadequate as an account of evil in Christian
Yeah.
theology.
Yeah.
Historically, Esau says, Christianity has taught that evil arises from three interlocking realities, often called the flesh, the devil, and the world. Keep in
Yep.
mind, Esau is preaching out of the New York Times when he says this. The flesh in Christian teaching can refer to our capacity for evil as humans, a shorthand for our tendency to sin. Christians also recognize a spiritual reality to evil, which we refer to as the devil. We do not suggest that the devil is an omnipresent being behind every act of malice. Nonetheless, we do believe that some acts of evil bear the marks of spiritual forces that
Yeah.
lead humans to unthinkable and unspeakable atrocities. And thirdly, Christian theology acknowledges a final reality, the world, as a cause of sin. We do evil because societies can encourage or give us access to acts of evil. So he says Christian theology has long focused on the government's need to restrain social evil. We have never expected governments to change hearts or even to solve every social ill. We have expected governments to have an impact on culture, changing and adjusting laws that allow the evil of the world to flourish. I do not need the government to change Salvador Ramos's heart. He was the shooter in Texas. I want it to make sure that others like him don't have access to AR-style assault rifles and 375 rounds of ammunition.
There you go.
So
Okay.
he's fighting back from the New York Times that we've forgotten about the devil and we've forgotten about the sin of the world. And we're trying to focus only on the human heart when it's convenient for us.
Right. One of the things, I mean, it was a great piece, and I'm so grateful that Esau wrote it. One of the things that needs to be pointed out is this idea that you can't legislate morality, that you can't
Uh-huh.
pass laws to make the human heart pure and good, and therefore why bother?
You can't, Skye. You can't.
Yeah, but when taken to the extreme that the NRA is taking it when it comes to guns, this is a very, very ancient heresy known as antinomianism. And
Ooh.
that's just a fancy way of saying against the law. And there were some Christians early on who argued that in Jesus, the law is fulfilled. Therefore, There's no reason to have government anymore. There's no reason to have laws or legislation. There's no reason to have any boundaries or rules at all, because Christ has entered us and now we are set free from the law and we are guided by the Holy Spirit. And on one level you go, yeah, ideally Christians who are regenerated and possess the presence of the Holy Spirit should be guided by a higher law. But that doesn't mean you no longer need the law at all for any human beings anywhere. That's not taught in the New Testament. And so when they apply that antinomianism logic when it comes to the issue of guns, they're guilty of Christian heresy. That is just a ridiculous argument, and many Christians make it when this issue of guns comes forward.
What if we apply sologamy as a principle to gun violence? Because if we all really love ourselves, won't we want a safer world? Joe, you got anything for us?
I feel like, much as you suggest, Sologamy has some things to say, I think making guns inaccessible would probably be more effective.
Well, you can say that because you don't care about the Second Amendment.
Well, I'm unsure.
You want a queen.
Sorry, what's that?
You want a queen. The reason
I would just like less guns. I would like my kid not to come home and tell me about the drill they did that day, because since they were in kindergarten, they have been hiding under tables. I would like that to not be their norm, because I'd like them to not have the burden of responsibility on this.
Yeah.
You know what's terrible?
There was a 12-year-old at a demonstration in D.C. over the weekend against gun violence, and he was holding up a poster that had a target on it, and then the hole in the target cut out, and he was holding his face in that hole saying, "Am I next?" And I was just thinking, what? I don't want to live in a country where 12-year-olds have to think like that.
Yeah.
And have to demonstrate to say, hey, would you please care about this issue enough to do something about it? Because I have to think about it now and put my face in a target. Esau says,
sorry, when Sandy Hook happened, my kids were in elementary school, and everyone who had a kid was just, you can't imagine the horror of it all. My youngest daughter is now about to go into high school, and one of the thoughts that I've actually had is, okay, I only have 4 more years of kids in school. I mean, not to say mass shootings don't happen in other places. The worst one in Las Vegas was at a country music concert, right? It can happen, but that unique fear of this happening in my kid's school, it's terrible, but I'm counting down the days to her graduation because I don't want to have to worry about this anymore. And that's not fair, because we should all still worry about it, because it's not just our kids, but this is a sick, this is something that people in other advanced cultures don't worry about. It's a uniquely American problem.
Yeah.
The reason, Esau says, the reason that some Christians cannot bring themselves to support gun law reforms is the same reason some Christians cannot effectively battle racism beyond condemning individual racists. They have a deficient doctrine of sin and evil, limiting it to the individual. If some Christians refuse to do the good of reforming our gun laws, it will not be because believing in evil hearts eliminates the need for gun reform. It will be because they refuse to accept what the Christian faith teaches. Societies, like individual hearts, can be broken and twisted. Yeah. Thank you, Esau. We'll link to that story in the show notes.
Don't you think, though? I mean, I again totally agree with Esau, but he argues that people have a deficient view of sin, which is why they can't see racism as a systemic issue and they can't see gun violence as a systemic issue. It's only individual. I say bull, because those same people do have a systemic view of evil when it comes to other issues. The problem isn't that they don't have a systemic view of evil. It's that they don't want to have a systemic view of evil on these issues, because it's selective because it would put upon them a burden or a responsibility to change something they don't want changed.
Okay. Examples of issues that we do see systemic evil?
Abortion. Some people view sexual revolution and LGBTQ rights as a systemic dynamic in the culture, not just an issue of individuals, whether or not you think it's evil.
How about the direction of public schools?
Right.
Ooh,
there's fights all the time. Look at CRT, all this hysteria over CRT. There's a systemic case they want to make that we need to change school curricula so that our kids are not indoctrinated in liberal wokeism. That's a systemic approach to an issue. They're not going teacher by teacher and saying we need to
Yeah.
change individual teachers' hearts.
Or the awful part. No.
Okay, our friend Charlie Dates wrote a piece in Christianity Today entitled "White Churches, It's Time to Go Pro-Life on Guns." The Christian majority in America needs to shake off its malaise and work with black pastors to end shooting violence. And he takes aim at something that Skye and I took aim at last week or the week before, is people pointing to Chicago as proof that gun control can't work. 'Cause Chicago. And boy, for an inner city Chicago African-American pastor like Charlie Dates, boy, does that offend them.
Yeah.
So he's reaching out to his white pastor brothers and sisters, saying, I write to you because your denominations, like the Southern Baptist Convention, are politically influential in states with senators who could, if pressured by their base, be moved to act. They have swung elections in the past when issues were important to them that drove them to the ballot box. So black pastors in Chicago will not be listened to. But clusters of white pastors in Georgia or Florida or Alabama or Tennessee will. So just in the same way he says that black pastors were called to join with white pastors to oppose abortion and oppose pornography and oppose the societal evils that were of value to white pastors, Charlie Dates is calling out white pastors to join black pastors in joining the causes that are valuable to them as well. I don't know how much hope he has that that's going to happen, but it's worth a try. He said the topic of gun violence has always been placed in the category of politics, and therefore it's divisive, as opposed to abortion, adoption, pornography, the war on drugs, which were key moral issues framing the American social landscape. Why can't we let African-American pastors add a few topics out of the category of divisive politics to the category of key moral American issues? Joe, why do you think?
Do you want to know the answer to that question, or is it really obvious?
Yeah, no, I want you to answer.
Okay, so why aren't people listening to African American pastors and black pastors? Yeah. Because they think they know better.
They think their pastors are better?
Or they think they see, because
they think they know better.
They know better, yeah. I mean, because otherwise, why?
I don't know. Well, we've already decided. We've already decided that if you
pastors and Indigenous pastors and Asian American pastors and all, because they think they know better.
Yeah. We've already decided that if you promote any topic or policy that we've associated with the left, that you're not a Christian. That the views of the right are the Christian views and the views of the left are the non-Christian views, which is why a pastor like Charlie Dates or a writer like Esau McCauley are so confusing to people when they first bump into them from suburban white megachurches, to say, wait a minute, how can he be a pastor if he doesn't support all the same policies that I've been told to support?
This is where it's really helpful, again, to think of the global church. Do you know what I mean? This is where it's really, again, really wise for us to maybe, because there are some big churches in other countries too, with big, doing big things and amazing things happening. This is where it's really helpful to look at the historical, to have a historical lens and a broader picture. Because who was it? It was Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie who talks about the danger of a single story. That it's not just that it's inaccurate, it's incomplete. And I think it's because we have an incomplete picture. It's an incomplete picture when you don't see the counsel and the wisdom and the lessons learned and the failures and the successes of a global body.
Yeah.
Of which we call ourselves family, where we are not just the providers, but we are learners.
Yeah, but we're family, but we're really dad in the family. We're dad.
Yeah, well, we think we are.
And Father knows best, Joe. Father, didn't you ever watch the show? You probably didn't have this in England when you were a kid. There was a show called Father Knows Best, and it taught us how things should work in a family. And since America is the daddy of the world, why are you looking at me like that? Isn't this what they taught you growing up in England?
Well, I just remember that when we were, well, no, I mean, they probably said the Queen was the mother in that one. So let's not
that
pretend
works.
the colonizers aren't English and everything. But
Mom doesn't get to touch the guns.
no, quite. Those sorts of things were outsourced with the UK. But I thought the daddy was God. I thought that was the language we used as believers.
Well, okay.
I thought the whole
in another sense.
was
In
not
another
our American father, just our,
Oh, Joe,
I know it's awkward. I'm sorry.
You're making this hard for me.
What?
I know, and your ability to get another invitation depends on how much you agree with me. So right now it's looking very, very.
That happens so much in life, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? So Skye, help us out. We need to wrap it up.
I know, but before we go, Joe, I'm curious about your community. And are these topics things that you are able to address, or your church leadership is able to address with your people, or do you find them to be hot potatoes that nobody wants to go near and they're divisive? Like, how do you do it?
I mean, when no, it comes up. It has to, because it has to. Oh gosh. And I think it's accelerated in the past number of years. I mean, depending on which community we're talking about. As an African community, we were talking about things like race for a long time, because it was as women, we've been talking about Me Too for a long time. And so on certain things have been whispers, and the volume's gone up. I think today in church community and in the communities of people that I'm coaching, leaders are trying to work out, how do we lead people through this when there are massively divergent views? Right. And is there a space for my voice in this? And even if it's divisive, does that mean even if it's divisive to bring it up? Or what's our definition of that? And where's our prophetic voice as a church anymore? Are we supposed to say things? Or do we I think it's evoking lots of questions in terms of, how do we lead through moments like this? And will it cost me my job if I say what I feel?
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. My experience with a lot of church leaders on this issue and others has been, they may have convictions, even biblically rooted ones, or rooted in the historic global church or whatever, but there is a sense of, if I bring this up, I don't want to, even if I don't lose my job, I don't want to deal with the chaos. I don't want to deal with the fallout of it. And so there's a lot of pressure to just ignore these kinds of divisive things. And that doesn't seem pastorally faithful either.
No, I agree. I don't think it's like, what are we here for? Do you know what I mean? In terms of, I'm talking big picture, like Great Commission vibes, and being part of the renewal of all things, and only doing what we see the Father doing, and making all things new, and redemption, and all of that. And what it feels like we're having the wrong conversation in the wrong direction when that stops us. It's like, oh, we can't talk about it because it's divisive, and is divisive code word for uncomfortable, right, or doesn't tie up in a neat bow, or can make us feel a little tense. And surely, as believers who believe this God is as amazing as we think he is, if we're following him, surely, I mean, if he's not going to speak to this, if there's not some texture of the kingdom of God that can address some of this, what on earth are we doing? What are we here for? Why did we have all those vegetables, Phil? If it wasn't...
I've been asking myself that, Joe.
I mean, why?
What was it for? What was it all for?
What was it for?
A lot of vegetables gave their lives for that. And what do I have to show for it? All right, we got to wrap up. Nothing. Joe, thank you so much. How can people, what's your podcast? What's the name of your podcast, and where can people find it?
Lead Stories, and I host it with my friend Steph O'Brien, and we talk about leadership, maybe a little ranty occasionally, but we talk about leadership, we talk about life. You can find us there. Yeah, be good to have you, friends.
Okay, cool. And Skye, what are you up to, and where can people find more about you? I'm kidding.
I'll just turn off my lights and go back into my hole.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week with more. We got a great guest coming up in the interview. We're only halfway done. Oh my gosh, it's going to get just better and better and better. Thank you to our supporters on Patreon and to everybody who tells people about us and rates us on iTunes and does all of that. And we will see you guys next week. Bye.
I've got 2 quick announcements for everyone before we jump into our conversation with the guys from the Bible Project. First off, we are celebrating our 10th anniversary as a podcast, and to do that, we've released a series of brand new 10th anniversary merchandise. You can now get mugs, stickers, tote bags, t-shirts, hats, all featuring Holy Post special 10th anniversary logos and artwork featuring the hosts. And they're kind of an interesting style. My favorite personally is the Plinky Pete Memorial sticker, which I plan on having on my laptop really soon. So if you're interested in getting some of that limited edition 10th anniversary merch, be sure to go to holypost.com and click on the shop button. The other announcement is one I'm really excited about. As you know, for the last couple weeks, we've been missing Caitlin Chess and Christian Taylor, who are both in Europe right now, one for a class, one filming another movie, and so we've had guest hosts coming in, and they've been great. But if you've been missing Caitlin and Christian, then you need to become a Patreon supporter of the Holy Post so you can get even more content from Christian and Caitlin. For some time now, Christian and I have been releasing regular segments called Christian Asks, where we sit down together and she asks me her questions about the Bible or my daily devotional, and it leads to some really great conversations. Well, I'm excited to announce that we're releasing a brand new series called Getting Schooled by Caitlin Chess. Sometimes she brings up some really deep topics on the regular show that we don't have time to get into, and so we decided let's give Caitlin some expanded time to go deeper on some of these subjects that many of you want to hear more from Caitlin. So the first episode is being released this week, and it's all about political theology. It's really fun. Phil's recorded his own theme song for this special segment with Caitlin, and in each one, she and I have a conversation going deeper into these topics, and then at the end, she offers 3 additional books or resources for you to go even deeper in your own study of those topics. If that's the kind of material you'd love to get more of, then I encourage you to become a Patreon supporter of the Holy Post, and you'll get access to that kind of bonus material every week. So go to holypost.com and click the Support Us button to sign up today and get access to Christian Asks, to Getting Schooled by Caitlin Chess, as well as bonus interviews with many of our guests, plus special merchandise exclusive to Patreon supporters and a whole bunch of other stuff. So go check it out, holypost.com, and click the Support Us button. My guests today are Tim Mackie and John Collins, co-founders of the Bible Project, which they launched back in 2014 to create crowdsourced videos to teach people the Bible. Well, since then, they've created hundreds of videos and podcasts that have just been immensely helpful to many of us as we learn and grow in our understanding of the Scriptures. We've used them in our churches, small groups, and our families, and many of us relied on them heavily during the pandemic. Well, they're back to talk about how the Bible Project has evolved in the last couple of years and what their hope is for the new mobile app that just came out this year. Their goal is no longer just to teach people what's in the Bible, but how to read the Bible for themselves. What I really appreciate about the Bible Project isn't just the beauty of the videos they create or the scholarship behind them in the podcasts, but their desire to really equip ordinary people to understand the profound beauty and intricacy and literature that is the Old and New Testaments. They really have a respect and admiration for the Bible, its authors, and its indigenous culture that gets lost, frankly, in a lot of our contemporary American ways of engaging the Scriptures. So I hope from listening to our conversation, you're not only inspired to re-engage with the Bible Project's apps and videos and podcasts, but more than anything, that you'd be inspired to re-engage the Scriptures, and through the Scriptures to come to a deeper, more beautiful vision of God. And for our Patreon supporters, I want you to know that I have a bonus conversation with Tim Mackie and John Collins, where we get into some of what they've been recently discussing on their podcast about Leviticus, the Pentateuch, and particularly how the temple and tabernacle relate to the Garden of Eden. So if you want to get into some of that Bible nerd stuff, be sure to check out that bonus segment on Patreon. And if you're not a Patreon supporter, again, now's a great opportunity to do that. Go to holypost.com and click the Support Us button. Here is Tim Mackie and John Collins. John Collins and Tim Mackie, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Guy. Good to be with you.
And I'm grateful that you guys were able to squeeze this in before you both leave for your sabbaticals.
Yeah.
And this is our third attempt at trying to make this interview happen.
It's true. It's
And
true.
the first one was my fault. I actually had you guys scheduled for the interview the same day we were recording our 500th anniversary episode. And so that went super long. And I'm like, ugh. So I asked Julie, our assistant, to reschedule. And then we did. And then one of you guys, John,
Yeah.
was clearly not careful enough and got COVID.
Yeah.
Just terribly irresponsible.
Man, I went like 2 years without getting
Yeah,
COVID.
totally.
So
Yeah.
As far as I know, I haven't gotten it yet, but maybe I was one of those asymptomatic people.
Yeah.
So here we are finally talking.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful. The last time you guys were on this show, believe it or not, was in 2017.
Okay.
Episode 257.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a long, long time.
Yeah. 5 years.
I've said it before. I say it to everybody I can. I'm a huge fan of the Bible Project, immensely beneficial to me. And many, I had lunch with a dear friend who said he used Bible Project with his family all through COVID to help them. So we don't have to spend a ton of time celebrating what you guys are doing, but I love it. Let me begin with this, because over the years, I've noticed sort of a shift in what you guys are producing. It felt like at the beginning, the Bible Project was really meant to explain the Bible, which you're still doing. But at some point, there was this shift from just explaining the Bible to trying to explain how to read the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Was that intentional? And if it was, what made you move in that direction?
Yeah, it has been intentional. And I think, boy, we haven't tried yet to capture all the streams that went into it. I think we have one recent story that has been given us a helpful metaphor for it. The magic trick. But, But you go first.
The magic trick, yeah. Well, the first thing was we did a whole series on how to read the Bible.
That's true.
And I don't remember exactly why we did that. But it turned into a 19-part series.
Video series. Yeah. And years of podcast episodes.
Yeah. And so that was really the first step in that direction of going from, hey, just watch us read the Bible and explain it to you, to this idea of, we want you to read the Bible too. We also, when we launched our app, as we started building the app that launched this year, we talked a lot about the end game being building a Bible reader that teaches you how to read the Bible while you're reading the Bible. And then we also got a lot more sophisticated in our understanding of what we think the Bible is, like what kind of literature it is and how we would talk about that. And then realized there's really 3 different skills, like literary skills, that underlie all of the content we're making. And we're kind of teaching people how to use those skills. So there was kind of this centralization of all these thoughts. And then we hired a guy who gave us this really cool analogy about magic.
Well, yeah, he would use the videos in teaching classes at his church, like theme videos where we take one idea and run it through the whole biblical story from that word or idea. And he said, for people in his church who were kind of newer to the Bible or just have been confused by it for a long time, they experienced it as like the effect of a magic trick. Like, whoa, how'd they do that? Because when I read the Bible, I don't see the water of life eking out on every page, but somehow these guys retell the story of the Bible and the water of life is everywhere, for example. And so he says like a magic trick. And what we have been doing and in the last couple of years have become really intentional about is beginning to dial in our content and create new content that really is helping people learn how to do the magic trick themselves. And that's kind of a way to talk about the shift that we've been going through.
Okay, I like that analogy. That's actually kind of interesting because, there is that old agreement among magicians that you don't share how the magic trick is done.
Yeah, right.
Is there sort of a sense among Bible teachers, pastors, preachers in particular, like in the Protestant tradition, we always affirm the importance of Christians engaging the Bible and engaging Scripture. But there's this unspoken thing about expertise. Like you ultimately, you need me in that pulpit. You want me in that pulpit, right? It's kind of a few good men thing, because I'm the only one who really has the training and expertise to really tell you what's in the text. And if I give you a behind the curtain look at the magic trick and how it's done, then maybe they don't really need me anymore. So essentially, are you guys trying to put every preacher in the country out of business? Is that your secret mission?
No, not at all. Not for a second. I think it's about that throughout the history of God's people, through the people of Israel on into the early Messianic Jewish communities to the worldwide Jesus movement, the scriptures have played a central and foundational role in grounding these communities in the story that they're living out, in their lived habits as a group of people in a certain time and place. And so what we're after is just helping more people have more tools for how to understand scripture on their own. And it actually turns out the core skill set, you have to learn it. You're probably not going to intuit it at this point just by going to church. But once you learn it, it's a very intuitive skill set that is designed to be engaged by groups of people reading and meditating together. And so it really is ideal. Local churches are ideal because they're where this all came to life. And the role of teachers and pastors, I think, is in helping them learn what the Spirit is saying through Scripture to this people in this community, in this time, in this place right now. But the reading experience, I think, is meant to be shared by everybody.
In that regard, you're really building this philosophy on an early Jewish understanding of engaging the Bible, where even at the time of Jesus, disciples would gather around a rabbi, a teacher, and they would talk about and debate the meaning of the text. But today we don't really do that in our churches, at least not very much. We're told what the scriptures say, but we're not really taught how to read them ourselves in a meaningful way. Okay, let me bring up some stats that I find both interesting and disturbing. So groups like the American Bible Society have put out lots of data in recent years showing that Americans have more access to the Bible than ever. We have more Bibles, more Bible apps, more content and teaching and podcasts and videos and all this stuff than any people who've ever lived in the history of the world. So for those who want to engage the Bible, it's there. Like they have access. At the same time, biblical literacy has been going down for decades in this country. And then in 2016, Lifeway, which is a Southern Baptist research group, did this really, really interesting survey. First, they asked Americans in general who identify as Christian, which is 75% of Americans, and we know that's probably just a nominal identity. They asked them basic questions about Christianity, and not surprisingly, the vast majority of American Christians hold deeply heretical beliefs that are totally unbiblical about the nature of God and Jesus and the Trinity and salvation and all that sort of stuff. But then, this is the shocking part, they narrowed their research down to just evangelical Christians. And they didn't use a generic definition of evangelical. They used the NAE definition, which is the National Association of Evangelicals. So these are people who believe in the authority of Scripture, who believe that salvation only comes through the atoning death of Jesus on the cross, and they are committed to personal faith in him and personal transformation. That's how they define an evangelical. And then they looked just at that group of people and their beliefs, and this was the shocking part of the survey. They found that evangelicals held more heretical beliefs than the average American.
Oh my goodness, wow.
Right? This is the group that says they take the Bible seriously, and yet they were less biblically literate than the average American Christian.
Yeah.
That's scandalous, right? Okay, so here's my question for you guys. Given that your vocations, your callings are to teach the Bible and how to read it, how do you reconcile this, that we have more access than ever, and yet we seem to be more ignorant and heretical than ever?
I have a hypothesis.
You're giggling like this is a joyful little challenge in front of you. What do you think? What's behind that?
No, I want to hear what you're going to say, and then I'll say what I'm thinking.
Well, my hypothesis is that, well, and this comes from my own experience. So I grew up in an evangelical church, and the Bible is was incredibly important to my tradition, is still. And, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Bible. Like, that's how we rolled. And the truth of the matter, though, was for me, and I think for most of the people in the church, was we actually didn't read the Bible. We had parts of the Bible that were familiar enough that we could go to them for kind of devotional times. And I should just speak to my experience, is that I would go to passages I felt comfortable with. And if I went into parts of the Bible that I were foreign, I would just get overwhelmed and confused. And what I found was I felt like I had the answer sheet, and the Bible was actually just kind of getting in the way. And so I leaned more on the answer sheet than on the Bible itself. Because the other part of my hypothesis is the Bible is just a really difficult book. It's ancient literature. And while it's a beautiful book and could speak to you on a simple level without having to learn all these skills and become a Bible geek, like any good art can speak to you just by experiencing it. It also is it's literature that does take a lot of energy to engage with. And so you put those things together, and I think you get a lot of people who say they love the Bible, but are comfortable with not really using the Bible to get the answers. And there you go.
I think that's absolutely correct. Yeah, especially evangelical traditions tend to be a populist kind of movement. And so we want to say, oh, the Bible is accessible to everybody. And to keep that accessibility open, we tend not to reveal to them how ancient and culturally contextualized it really is, because that feels like we're putting up barriers. So we make the barriers really low, tell people, yeah, you should engage it, but we don't give them the tools to actually do so. And it makes sense they would go to the Cliff Notes, the cheat sheet, as you called it, rather than the Bible itself. Tim, what were you thinking?
Well, one is just, that those statistics don't surprise me at all. And I also think that last statistic, that people who are more familiar with the Bible also tend to hold the most diverse beliefs. And so I think I might dial that in to say my hunch is that's not about biblical literacy as such, but it's about the how in tune are my reading skills. How in tune are they with actually how the Bible is designed to be read, so that I get what it's actually trying to communicate on its own terms? Because usually if you have really divergent beliefs, it's because you've been reading the Bible a lot, but you're just taking its ideas in a way different direction than any of the authors ever intended. For me, this has been kind of the journey. It started in Bible college, but it really became focused in graduate school. And then that's just where I got the tools to discover what is hidden in plain sight, the fact that the Old Testament, the New Testament, is ancient Jewish literature. And actually the apostles and Jesus are not alone in how they're reading and understanding their Bible. If you go to the Dead Sea Scroll community that existed in the centuries right leading up to John the Baptist and Jesus, if you go to all of the diverse Jewish communities that produced the literature that is now called the Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha, they all read the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the same exact way as Jesus and the New Testament authors, or at least with the same types of reading methods or strategies. And in a way, the magic trick that we're trying to teach everybody to do is the set of reading tools that ancient Israelites and Jews just had wired into them through being raised to read Scripture in a certain way. And so we've kind of distilled that to just say we are trying to teach people how to read the Bible the way it was designed to be read. And that will have overlap, I think, with a lot of how our communities train us to read and understand Scripture. But there's going to be some significant differences too. And if I'm going to put in the effort to read this ancient Israelite literature, why do we do it in the first place? I mean, we do it because we're followers of Jesus, And Jesus said these texts uniquely illuminate who he is and the story that he saw himself bringing to fulfillment. That's at least that's why I'm in the game. And so I want to know how he read and understood these texts, how it fits in the context of how they were designed to be read. That's maybe a simple way of putting it, but that's my simplest way right now at the moment.
To go a little deeper down that road, how long have you been doing the Bible Project now?
8 years. We launched a video about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
We were working for a couple of years before that on it.
Okay. So in that 8 years, in both the videos and in your podcast, which I listen to religiously, John, you have an interesting role in that you function as the representative for the audience. And you tend to ask the questions that you think the audience is wondering about. I suspect, I don't mean this in a negative way, but I suspect that you're being a little bit condescending in that you are asking questions that I suspect you already know the answer to, but you're asking them anyway in order to bring the audience along. And you sort of represent the modern Western American mind. And you tee it up for Tim to go, you ignorant fool, here's how an ancient Israelite would read it. I mean, you don't say that obviously, but that's the tension in your dynamic between the two of you. So John, first of all, is that difficult for you? I mean, you obviously have an enormous amount of biblical knowledge, especially after 8 years of doing this.
I've learned a lot. I have.
No doubt.
But I, and the proportion of questions that I ask because I imagine the audience getting a little behind in the conversation is growing over the years. I think that's true. But I would say still the vast majority of my questions are genuine questions. I'm a forgetful person. And I think one of the things that makes me tick, which makes me quite useful for the role I'm in, is that I constantly second guess whether I really understand something. And if something feels a little bit blurry in my mind, that blurriness gets magnified and I get really uncomfortable with it. I think that a normal person kind of like, there's this thing called the illusion of knowing, which is like this really nice thing that God built into our psyche, which lets us feel like we understand the world more than we do. And if we didn't have that, I think we would go crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that illusion of knowing in my brain I think I didn't get the right, I didn't get the right recipe.
Yeah, totally.
Well, to put it positively, you're just a very curious person.
Right.
And that's a benefit to you and all of us who are trying to learn. The other side of it, though, John, is your questions. I think sometimes, Tim, you're a scholar and grateful for your depth of knowledge, but sometimes you can find yourself beginning to wind up that ivory tower of scholarship. And John, your questions will like pull him back down and go, wait a minute, like make sense of this. Bring the cookies to a lower shelf. Help me. Don't get lost in the scholarship. And that's super helpful. Tim, do you struggle with trying to take some of those really high, lofty, scholarly arguments about some obscure idea in the Old Testament and make it relatable to an average listener or audience?
I'm not sure. I mean, some of it really doesn't matter to very many people at all, and that's just how it is. But I think it's cool. So I think it just depends on what we're talking about. But it often is the case that some really big, significant idea that's core to your understanding of God's character will hang on the interpretation of some little details in a certain passage. And it's the nature of being a textually shaped community through history, is that through history, experience, each community's journey with the Spirit, and with these texts, that we are constantly having our views of reality and who God is, worked on and shaped and influenced over time. And to me, it's one of the most beautiful parts of the Christian tradition, is that it's a constant process of reshaping. and just accepting that I will constantly be under construction of my most core convictions. And that doesn't mean you don't believe anything at all, or that it's all wishy-washy. It's the opposite. But it just means Scripture has a power to keep working on us. And depending on what you discover, a whole new vistas, will open up that you didn't even know were there in the first place. At least that's been my experience.
Totally. And I've seen that, especially in this last couple months, you guys have been going through a series in your podcast on the Torah. Genesis, Exodus, and now we're in Leviticus. I was just listening to it this morning. These are parts of the Bible which are absolutely foundational. They set up all the themes, all of the theology, all of the narratives that end up giving definition and parameters to everything else that follows, including the Gospels and the New Testament. They're also the books that an awful lot of Christians really struggle to engage, other than some of the more exciting stories of family conflicts here and there, or maybe some of the Exodus stories, the beginning of Exodus, Moses and the Red Sea and all that. There are massive swaths of those books that most Christians never open up. Weird things about the architectural designs of the tabernacle and obscure laws of purification and, colors of different moles and skin legions and all that. So it's a lot of weird stuff. But you guys have done an amazing job of convincing your listeners that they have to engage this. But you do it without you're not going verse by verse or even chapter by chapter all the time. You are starting at a higher altitude and helping them see the literary design of these books. We don't have time to get into the weeds here, but can you begin to describe why and how are these books constructed in a way that might be surprising to people who've never been taught the Jewish literature styles and frameworks of these books?
Well, yeah, this is your expertise, Tim. I mean, I've been learning from you, and I could try to give an explainer, but let's hear how you're synthesizing this in real time
as of today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one way is to talk about how most of our modern Bibles train us by how they're structured to see the Bible like a reference book because of the chapter divisions, which are super helpful, and verse divisions. They're little subscript numbers, that appear above sentences. Really helpful reference system, but they're not original to, if we're just talking about the Old Testament, but even to the New Testament. They're not original to any of the biblical books. But that doesn't mean that biblical books don't have an organizational rationale. They do. And it's both a mix of ancient Israelite literary style and also the fact that these texts were designed to be read aloud and orally performed, and that they're primed for memorization and recitation in communities, and then also for individuals to meditate by reciting them over the course of a lifetime. And so just like the way a really good, concise sermon has an architecture to it, an introduction, a body, 3 points, and then a conclusion that summarizes
alliterated points.
Back, right? Alliterated points, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very common rhetorical design of a speech, in our culture. So in a similar way, in ancient Israelite culture, there was a set of strategies for how to organize a scroll through patterns of repetition. And what we're using a metaphor from symphonies, the design of symphonies that occur in these movements. Or like a play, the acts of a play.
Yeah, and that's the top layer of organization.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And then it gets more and more sophisticated, more and more interesting.
Yeah.
And what you discover is that there is so much intentional design on what we would call what Tim just called the movement level, then what you might call the narrative level. Or the story level, to the paragraph level, to the sentence, a line of Hebrew Bible. And there's so much design. And the design itself is part of the strategy, not only to memorize, but to make sense.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Paragraphs, stories, poems are designed in a way that's really different than modern Western mentalities of how we read poetry or novels. It's designed in what you could call symmetrical, non-linear, symmetrical shapes so that you begin to read things in a forward sequence, but then also read it from the outer parts to the inside. Often, like the key clue for the meaning of a whole section is buried in the middle sentence of the middle paragraph. And then once you have it, you're actually meant to go reread the whole thing all over again, and you'll experience it differently once you found the little nugget in the center. And so Proverbs 1 actually tells us this. It tells us that this is literature.
Psalm 1?
Also Psalm 1.
The Proverbs 1.
But Proverbs 1 tells you that this is a collection full of analogies, parables, and dark sayings.
Dark sayings.
Yeah, or dark, hidden sayings,
right.
things that you won't get on the first read. I think we often encounter the confusion that it causes in us as a glitch, but it's actually a feature designed to bring us into multiple rereadings and to become more dependent on our community to help.
It feels
give
to
us
me
understanding.
It feels to me a little bit like a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah,
totally.
It totally.
Where you come out of it and you go, okay, I'm entertained, but I'm not sure I completely understand what I just experienced. And I need to go back and watch it 4 more times.
Yeah.
You said you listened to the podcast. We jammed on Tenet.
His most recent movie, Tenet.
Yeah, that one messed me up.
Yeah, totally.
But you're right. It has that symmetry to it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the theme of the whole.
When Psalm 1 says the ideal reader of Scripture reads it, meditates on it day and night over the course of a lifetime, it's not just a pious, throwaway line. It's actually the kind of literature that will take a lifetime of pondering. Not that you won't get the basic ideas, but that there are layers of meaning and depth and things that you won't see on just on your first reading. And that's
was one of
by design.
The big takeaways I had from my seminary education was I couldn't have admitted this at the time, but earlier in my Christian formation and my engagement with Scripture, I think I carried a chronological snobbery. I don't know what else to call it. Like a sense that, well, we're modern people, we're more intelligent, we know more about the world and the way it works, and these ancient authors, they were probably dumb. They probably didn't know a lot. They probably weren't that intelligent. And so I would go into the Bible, both the Old and New Testament, with sort of a sense of these aren't really brilliant writers. And then I started studying the text in their original languages and understanding some of these things that get lost in translation. And you begin to realize, for me, it was the Gospels where I first noticed this. Oh my goodness, these fishermen were brilliant. Like they were truly brilliant storytellers and writers and crafters of this narrative, and they were deeply artistic and literary in how they put this together. You know the Old Testament really well, Tim. You're a scholar of that, and that's what's been coming through as I've been listening to your podcast and watching these videos. Is we underestimate how brilliant these authors were, and not just these authors, but then the communities that inherited these scriptures and over time refined them and edited them and pieced them together in a way that just is exquisitely layered and beautiful and fantastic. Okay, as we
just one more note, just because I think it's important given our Christian faith traditions that we're in, is that I also believe as a part of that, it's what I would expect if the Spirit of God, who's the author of all beauty, is actually inspiring. And what that word means, that would be a whole other conversation, right? But if I really believe the Spirit of God, who's the author of all the beauty I see around me when I walk outside, is also motivating, driving, superintending the process of the creation of these texts, it's actually what one would expect, And I am constantly embarrassed by my surprise at how sophisticated these texts are, because it's like, oh, I guess I should have expected that, but somehow I didn't. Because I think I also, on a deep level, share that same assumptions that you do, Skye. So I really resonate with that.
Hey, thank you guys for being here and for the good work you're doing. I've been part of a house church for a couple of years now. We use your videos all the time for teaching and instruction. I know many others have. I think the last time you were on, I said this, that there's a whole lot of famous pastors and megachurch leaders that will be forgotten before their corpse is cold. And the work you guys are doing is going to last a century. I mean, it's so valuable and important. So thank you for doing it. And thank you for doing it so faithfully. And everybody, please download the new BibleProject app. not only will you obviously get their great content and videos about how to read the Bible, but you'll learn about these movements and the literary construction of the brilliant scriptures that God has given us. It'll transform the way you read the Bible. Guys, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Skye.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.